Okay, gonna go ahead and get started. We started a few minutes late. Apologies to anyone. We were waiting to see if Kathy Cherico arrived, and we haven't heard from her, so we were kind of giving her a couple extra minutes. In the meantime, the other members of the board are here: Ms. Rick Dreyer, David Shuey, myself, Julie Johnson. We have a new member of the Board of Adjustment as of last month, David Voigt, who I indicated that he was welcome to come today, but obviously he would not be able to vote on this variance since the bulk of the information was presented at our last meeting. So with those opening comments, we can go ahead and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So the first thing on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. And as a couple of people have pointed out to me, and I kind of did this on purpose, I left all of the variance requests on the agenda, even though a couple of items were removed as far as the applicant was concerned. I did that just because even though we got a letter to the town, I thought it was important for anyone who was not privy to that information understood that those applications were actually removed. So they are still on the agenda, but with the acknowledgement that those items will be skipped because they're now removed, do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Make a motion.
Thank you. Rick?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so as you recall from our last hearing, we did hear the presentation, and the board decided to leave the comments open, as well as as far as the public hearing is concerned. And the board just felt like it needed more time because there were so many variations and so much information to go forward with. So at this point, we still have public comment, and then we did get a couple of items in.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Should we say what has been dropped from?
Oh, I was going to let,
Oh,
when
I'm
we
sorry.
get to the
Okay.
presentation, I was going
Okay.
to let him explain that just so that
Okay.
everybody's clear, but thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and read these public comments. Hi, Board of Adjustment. The town has a free board requirement. If you're going to ignore it for this building, will you ignore it for everyone? Why should this building get an exception and homeowners not? The board has not been shown any unnecessary hardship by this property. This will set a precedent which could worsen our community rating, which then raises the cost of flood insurance for the property owners in town. All this time and effort was spent by committees and Dewey to set a free board requirement. If you are just going to give it an exception, what's the point of having a free board requirement? The Board of Adjustment also previously set a precedent by denying EDS. A member gave the quote, "It's going to flood, it floods there all the time. Elevating the building protects everybody. This area abuts the bay, and you have heard testimony from neighbors how the area floods." Separately, Mr. Mandela said there was no opposition to the pool structure, which is not correct. At the last hearing, it was read into the record. You would also be allowing a 3-story structure 7 feet in a 10-foot yard setback. There is no precedent for allowing this. Thanks, David Moskowitz. And then I have another one, which you'll have to bear with me because when I printed it, it came out really kind of fuzzy. So, dear Chairperson Johnson and members of the Board of Adjustment, during the Board of Adjustment hearing on May 16th, 2022, residents of the Cajun Cove community expressed concerns over the relocation of the pavilion closer to our community and the proposed new outdoor pool. The applicant's legal representative has informed us that the applicant has withdrawn its proposals to relocate the pavilion and construct the outdoor pool. That being the case, my concerns have been alleviated, and I do not object to the remaining variances being requested, including 1, the existing pool enclosure and expansion on the Dagsworthy Avenue side of the property, 2, the cabana serving the most northerly accommodations on the first floor, and 3, the relief from the free board requirement. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this process, Robert Bell. So those are our 2 public comments. Before we see if there are any public comments in the waiting room, Mr. Vandelis, will you go ahead and kind of update us with what has been withdrawn? I know you have a copy of the agenda, so we can all be clear on what has been withdrawn and anything else you'd like to present, and then we'll get any additional public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm looking at Glenn Mandalis with Baird Mandalis Brockstead. We have offices on Savannah Road in Lewis, and I am representing the applicant More Blue Water. So looking at the agenda, we did withdraw, and there's written correspondence on the record, withdrawing these couple items. First, the first number one under the agenda deals with the pool enclosure and multi-level deck structure. That continues to be a request of the applicant. Number two deals with the new outdoor pool that was to be located on the bay side of the property. That has been withdrawn. Number three deals with the cabana that is on the Bellevue side of the property, northerly side of the property. That remains a request. The fourth request is for a variance of 7.5 inches from the freeboard requirement. That continues to be a request. The fifth item deals with the relocation of the gazebo closer to the Cajun Cove side of the property. That has been withdrawn. And the sixth request is an appeal relating to a setback. That setback consideration dealt with the pool that was proposed on the bay side of the property. Since that pool has been withdrawn, there's no longer an appeal. So we're left with items 1, 3, and 4. I would mention that, I was kind of surprised when some of the Cajun Cove residents appeared last time, and I didn't give a lot of consideration to their usage when we prepared for it, and didn't discuss those matters with the client. So once those concerns became obvious, we did have a conversation with the design team and our client, and they recognized those as real concerns. And the gazebo is not a huge need of the client, and nor was the outdoor pool. Based upon some photographs that the residents shared with us, we thought maybe it wasn't the wisest to go forward with the outdoor pool as well. So those are the reasons that we withdrew those two requests. I do want to address the freeboard requirement, but if there are questions that you have for me that you want me to talk about initially before I get into the freeboard, I'm happy to do that. Or if you'd rather I go through the freeboard issue, I'm happy to jump right into that.
Just go ahead and we'll have questions.
Yeah.
That's
Great. So the
please explain the freeboard, because yeah.
Okay, so let me start with this. You as a Board of Adjustment have the ability to vary the requirements of the zoning code, and that's what you're usually doing when you sit as a Board of Adjustment. That's probably 99.5% of your cases are zoning code questions about setbacks and heights and all those sorts of things you find in the zoning code. You also have the ability to vary the requirements of the town's flood damage reduction code. That's found in Chapter 101, and it really deals with high water events and how to protect against high water events. So what we're dealing with in this instance is this existing structure is in FEMA's AE flood zone. A structure existing in the AE flood zone is required to be elevated 6 feet above base flood. So there's a requirement that any new construction that came in right now, and they're in an AE flood zone, the building official would say, you have to elevate the building to 6 feet under FEMA's requirements. But then she'd say, however, the town has implemented an additional 12 inches freeboard requirement. So although FEMA requires 6 feet, FEMA has made a determination that 6 feet for intents and purposes of elevation is safe for intents and purposes. But then they say, hey, if the town wants to do something better, we'll give you credit for that. And I'll explain what that credit is later. So the town of Dewey Beach has implemented an additional 12-inch freeboard requirement. So effectively in the town, in an AE zone, you have to be 7 feet above base flood. Where the building currently sits, it sits at 6.4 feet elevation. And there's an elevation certificate that's been put on the record demonstrating that. So what that means is the building as it currently sits right now is 0.4 feet above FEMA's requirement. But it also means that because the town has added an additional 12 inches, we're 7.5 inches below the town's requirement. So if you think about, this screen being the base flood, say this is at 6 feet, right? That's where FEMA says you have to be. The building sits someplace in here above FEMA's requirement, but up here, 7.5 inches higher is the town's requirement. So we're between that zone of okay with FEMA, but not okay with the town, which ultimately is not okay with FEMA, just to put a head on it, because FEMA is going to look at the requirements the town has imposed. But we'll go through exactly how that kind of works out from a flood rate perspective in a moment. So does everybody kind of understand where the building sits, where the FEMA line is, and where the town freeboard line is? Okay. So we've requested a 7.5 inch variance from the freeboard requirement because that's the minimum that we need to get relief from that requirement of the town of 12 inches. We need 7.5 additional inches to get relief. So we've requested that minimum variance. So again, the uniqueness really of this circumstance is that the building already fully complies with FEMA's base flood elevation of 6 feet, but it doesn't comply, and it was built in compliance with the regulations at the time. There's no suggestion that the building wasn't built in compliance, but over time, the town implemented these 12 inches and made the building legal, but non-conforming. It was built legally, but it doesn't conform to the current requirement of 12 inches of freeboard. And I do think that this additional requirement of 12 inches of freeboard, it makes good sense in the case of new construction, in the case of sort of substantial additions, I suppose. But in our instance, and I'm going to explain why, it doesn't yield to the benefit of the town to require that this entire structure be elevated by 7.5 inches. And that really is our hardship and our practical difficulties, that we were built legally, the code was changed, and to elevate this entire structure to make these modest improvements would be quite a hardship and a practical difficulty.
Now, is this just for the new? So explain to me, because this is where I got confused. I get the 7.5 inches,
Mhm.
but exactly where is the variance needed for the entire building, or just the new structures, enclosures that you're proposing to complete?
So my view is that it's likely needed for the entire building. That's the approach that I've taken. I know that I could probably take a thinner line, but it seems when you really kind of consider the objectives of the flood ordinance, it's the entire building that's being considered. And the issue that we've run into here, the most recent issue that's important for your consideration, I think, is that FEMA, and Ms. Hinks pointed this out to us recently, we were all laboring under a different presumption, but FEMA takes the view that hotels and motels are mixed use structures. So we had always considered this. We thought that if the variance from the freeboard requirement was not granted, there'd be an opportunity for our client to do what's called dry flood proofing. It's additional structural improvements that basically flood proof the building so that it'll be designated in compliance with the freeboard requirement, even if you don't elevate it. It's costly. There's a lot of additional things you have to do. But what we learned recently is that FEMA considers hotels and motels to be mixed use structures, such that like lobbies and those sorts of areas are commercial areas of the building, but the units where people are sleeping are considered residential. Dry flood proofing is not permissible under the FEMA regs to satisfy a freeboard requirement or any elevation requirement for residential, right? So the commercial areas, it would be allowed. So if we're only making improvements to the lobby area, I suppose you could argue that you don't need to comply. But it seems to me that the direction that FEMA is going, it basically says if you are making improvements that are at least 50% of the cost of the existing building, whatever it's valued at as it sits there right now, then you have to elevate. And it doesn't say improvements only relating to commercial or only relating to residential. It says if you're making improvements. So my view is that it was only fair to take a broader reading of it and say that if it's 50%, no matter what you're improving, if you get to that 50% threshold, the elevation requirement kicks in. Does that all, everybody kind of?
Now, the 50% requirement, now I know you were close when you had the original proposal with the pool and everything. Where are you?
We think we probably would exceed it.
Still?
Yeah, we think we probably would exceed it. That's the reason. And Jeff's on, I may have him comment on that. So Jeff, hold your fire for now, but just be considering that question, which is the original plan, which had the outdoor pool and some other improvements. We were pretty confident that it would exceed the 50% cost threshold. If you could, after I go through a few things, I'd like you to address whether the current plan, which removes that outdoor pool, we think would still hit that 50% threshold.
So if I could emphasize something in response to your question, if the structure as it currently stood was compliant with the freeboard requirement, and there would be no analysis of the 50%.
And that's FEMA's requirement?
The
The 50% is FEMA's issue with it?
It's essentially our requirement. It's FEMA's requirement, but we're here to enforce it. So if you have a non-compliant building and you aim to renovate it at a cost of greater than 50% of its current value, then you have to bring it into compliance. So if the freeboard variance is granted, then they won't have a 50% restriction to comply with. They can invest more than 50% of the current value of the building in the renovations. And I think the argument is that this is possible because they're compliant with base flood elevation, which is not.
So sort of as a side note, I was mentioning earlier that I'm not sure that denying the variance here would inure to the benefit of the town. I think it's a good requirement, the freeboard requirement for new construction. So when somebody says, well, why do you require it on residential and you're not going to require it here? Well, new construction residential, the town has made a policy decision that it wants an additional 12 inches. And again, we'll discuss how that relates to flood insurance rates in a minute. But so in that instance, it's new construction, you build in the 12 inches, it's not a hardship or a practical difficulty. Here, when you have a large structure like this, elevating it 7.5 inches to comply with the freeboard requirement does first create a hardship and a practical difficulty. But secondly, it's going to cause or disincentivize owners and builders to make these modest improvements. And the buildings are going to continue to deteriorate until at some point, the only thing that makes sense to do is to knock it down. And it just seems to me that you would want the ability to make these modest improvements throughout time. Clearly, at some point, every building has a natural life and is going to need to be redeveloped fully. But this building is not at that stage yet. So it could sit there for many more years, just in a deteriorating type of existence rather than being revitalized through the project that we're proposing here. So there are, in Chapter 101, there are certain considerations and certain determinations that the Board of Adjustment is required to consider, and determinations that you're required to make in connection with granting any variance from that chapter. So I'd like.
Sorry, this is what Mr. Townsend printed out for us.
So I'd like to go, thanks. So I'd like to go through them because I do think they need to be put on the record. I did previously address them in the initial application, but I kind of dismissed them. I indicated like, look, the building already satisfies FEMA's base flood elevation. These considerations are probably more directed at something that doesn't satisfy the base flood, but I think it's important since we're at this stage to go through them each and describe why we do satisfy them. One thing I do want you to pay attention to, if you would, members of the board, while I'm going through these, are that you won't hear me mention in any of the considerations that you're required to take into account or in any of the determinations that you're required to make, I won't mention a single time the National Flood Insurance Program. That's not a consideration or determination you're supposed to make. I'm going to address it at the end, which I think is important, and people have raised it, so I want to address it. But the legal standard you're supposed to apply are these considerations and these determinations, and they never say if it's going to affect flood rates somehow, deny the variance. I'll explain later how it's not going to affect flood rates, but just be kind of on notice that the legal standard to be applied doesn't deal with flood insurance rates. So the first consideration, and this is just so it's on the record, this is section 101-34 under subsection B. This is consideration for variances. Numbers 1, 2, and 3, I basically will address together because they largely relate to damage to property or to life. So number 1 is the danger that materials may be swept onto other lands to the injury of others. The second consideration is the danger to life and property due to flooding or erosion damage. And the third consideration is the susceptibility of the proposed development and its contents, if applicable, to flood damage and the effect of such damage on the individual owner. So that, I'll answer the damage question starting out with the fact that we're above the base flood elevation that FEMA requires. FEMA has spent days, hours, and years determining what is a safe elevation for purposes of damage to property and life. And they've said 6 feet does it. The town went higher. And again, I think there's good reasons for the town to have done that. But as a matter of, these 3 considerations that relate to what kind of danger to life and property is there, FEMA has said 6 feet is enough. We also can look to past history. This building has been there for decades. And I personally don't know of an instance where its existence at 6.4 feet elevation has caused any damage to life or property. That's the first. So those are the first 3 considerations. The fourth consideration is the importance of the services provided by the proposed development to the community. So we are a residential or accommodations use for the visiting public. Dewey Beach is a resort community, and the economy of this community is largely driven by the visitors that come here. There currently is a ban on new hotels and motels within the town, right? And the town has no real ability to expand through annexations because you're about at your limits. So the point here is that there's no place at these sorts of accommodations are going. So to the extent that you lose these sorts of accommodations through attrition because the building deteriorates and you can't redevelop it, all those businesses that are designed to service the visiting public as well as the locals are injured over time. And that goes right to the economy of the town. So this factor really this consideration goes to the economic sustainability. If the approach the board takes every time a marginal variance to the elevation requirement is requested, if the approach is taken is that we never grant these under any circumstances, there will be an economic impact to the town because we'll lose these facilities that people want to come visit. At some point, the visiting public is going to say, it's deteriorated too much. I don't want to come stay in Dewey Beach. I'll go north or go south. The fifth consideration is the availability of alternative locations for the proposed use, which are not subject to or are subject to less flooding or erosion damage. Here, alternative locations, it's not really an option for us because, again, this is an existing structure in a location where it sits. And as I just noted, the current policy of the town is no new hotels or motels. So we can't go to an alternative location where it's not subject to or subject to less flooding or erosion damage. It's just not an option for us under the fifth consideration. The sixth consideration is the necessity to the facility of a waterfront location where applicable, or if the facility is a functionally dependent use. So this facility does have a waterfront location. Admittedly, guest accommodations can and do exist in locations without a waterfront location. But this issue here, again, is sort of similar to the last couple where this is an existing structure and moving it to an alternative location just isn't an option available to us. So we can't move it to a location that doesn't have the waterfront that we have because where it exists. No hotels or motels are permitted anyplace else in Dewey. So this factor or consideration is largely irrelevant. The seventh consideration is the compatibility of the proposed use with existing and anticipated development. Luckily, the Bay Resort has been in existence for decades now, so we know that it's compatible with the existing development in the area. The eighth consideration is the relationship of the proposed use to the comprehensive plan for that area. I gotta be honest with you, every time I see one of these sorts of factor in any kind of analysis I'm doing where they say, what does the comp plan say? The comp plan is such a comprehensive plan that you can kind of cherry pick pieces of the document to support your argument or to detract from it. So, you know, for example, the comp plan does say, this is the 2018 comp plan, at section 3.11, it provides an objective and says this, the following quote, it says, if feasible and when feasible, redevelop available, underutilized and or blighted parcels with a variety of uses that are compatible with surrounding uses in terms of scale, character, use, and density. So I could point to that and say, aha, the comp plan is saying redevelop this property, that's what we want. But if you also go to another section of the comp plan discourages new development on the Bayside. So I suppose somebody could argue that since the comp plan discourages new development on the Bayside, this project should be discouraged as well. So I think there's language that exists either way. Nothing in the comp plan specifically addresses this exact property that I could find. But I think as far as the comp plan analysis goes, nothing exclusively prohibits the redevelopment of this property either.
You don't consider this new development, though?
No, and that's true because it does say that there should not be any. We should discourage new development on the Bayside. It doesn't really talk to redevelopment other than the objective that I read, which is town-wide. The ninth consideration is the safety of access to the property in times of flood for ordinary and emergency vehicles. This property has access from Dagsworthy, Bellevue, and Bayard, and from the Bay. So arguably, it's as accessible as any property in the town. The 10th consideration is the expected heights, velocity, duration, rate of rise, and sediment transport of the floodwaters and the effects of wave action, if applicable, expected at the site. This factor, again, I think is directed more at new proposed construction, but again, we're lucky we have a track record with the existing site. And while, as the one person commented in the written comments, the Bayside can get very wet, we again exceed the base flood elevation that FEMA requires, so we shouldn't see increased concerns in this area. 11 is the costs of providing governmental services during and after flood conditions, including maintenance and repair of public utilities and facilities such as sewer, gas, electrical, and water systems, and streets and bridges. Again, looking at the track record, to my knowledge, this area has not presented any costs to the town exceeding costs that are generally seen throughout the town after a high water event. Those are the 11 considerations. There are some determinations that you're required to make as well, and I'm going to go through those, but I'd like to first give Jeff an opportunity to comment on any of those considerations that he'd like to comment on, and then questions about the considerations. Jeff, if you're available, and Kate, if you're able to elevate him, or is he in? Okay.
Can you guys hear me okay?
We can, thanks.
Okay, perfect. First, sorry about being remote and sorry for the trouble getting on, but I think I've caught the gist of Lynn's presentation so far. And thank you for the opportunity to contribute, especially on these issues that we've gotten a little more information on since the last meeting.
So Jeff, could I interrupt you?
Yes.
This is Fred Townsend. We ask our witnesses to be administered the oath. Do you affirm the testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And further, with respect to what Mr. Mandalis has said so far, do you object to any of his factual representations?
No, not at all.
Okay, thank you. You can proceed.
Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to say a few simple things. One is that we have requested and received this kind of a freeboard exception in a couple of other venues over the past, I don't know, 20 or 25 years that I've been involved working with existing buildings. And, when it's been less than a foot, no one has, to my knowledge, there's never been any impact on the cost of insurance. And we've been granted them fairly readily with the town seeing the interest of the town being allowing buildings to be improved. We have also dry flood proofed a number of buildings, and this is the bit of information that I just came to understand last week with the help of Dawn, which was surprising to me, but very clear. Exactly what Glenn presented, that there is a technical bulletin put out by FEMA just in January of 2021. It's bulletin number 3. And it really clarifies that it interprets hotel rooms as residential and not commercial. So whereas we've done Taylor Bank and we've done the rope walk in Bethany, in a number of places, we've applied dry flood proofing measures. It really surprised me. We thought that sort of the backup plan here would be to dry flood proof this building, but apparently that's not an option. If not, apparently, fairly clearly, it's not an option. I agree with Glenn wholeheartedly that the net effect of denying this might be to really limit the amount that a good owner who's really willing to invest in this existing property could put in. And just in really, really bold round numbers, we believe that the building might get valued at something like $4 to $5 million, and it would limit the investment to maybe 4 to 6, even 2 to 3. And they're in the range of more like they'd like to spend 4 or 5, I think, or 4 or 6 maybe if we get granted the pool enclosure. So I think we're in a range of wanting to probably spend what would likely be 60 to 70% instead of 50%, which I think all would be greatly to the benefit of the quality of the product, and that would be to the benefit of the town to have buildings that are improved and upscaled. The only other thing I'd add, just a minor thing, when Glenn was talking about the damage, the 3 types of damage that might occur due to flooding, and obviously this exception would not add any additional exterior things that could float away. It would not in any way impact other properties by moving floodwaters or displacing floodwaters. But in terms of damage to the property, I think the fact that this is an all concrete and masonry building with all concrete walls and nothing to rot or anything, that if by chance it did flood and there was an extreme event, as I see it, this is the kind of building that would survive that quite well and be quite easy to recover from, and would really minimize the damage to that. So I think that there's a kind of a moderated risk in the event of an extreme occurrence. That's all, Glenn. Are there any other questions you think I should address?
Not from my end, Jeff. Thank you for that. Is any members of the board have questions at this point before we move on to the determinations?
Anyone?
Well, I guess I'm concerned from the public testimony at the first part of the hearing about people saying that this was a part of town that did flood and floods frequently and is flooding more often. And you're saying that you can create a new 3-story building that had, I don't know how many square feet, but that's not going to displace flooding somehow?
So it's not a new building. It's a structure that exists. We're not demolishing and rebuilding. We are improving it, mostly cosmetically. So the structure that's there, our footprint doesn't increase any other than the pool enclosure would create arguably a new footprint. But the area around the pool already is impervious, so we wouldn't be creating any new impervious areas there either.
But you would be blocking any sort of flood flow that crossed that area.
Right, but the building already exists there. So I mean, the
3-story. I mean, I guess I sort of am a little confused about. Without the variance, you couldn't build a 3-story structure. Is that right?
We would leave the 3 structure that's already there.
No, the 3-story pool cover.
Oh, That's correct. That's right. That's right. That's a separate variance from the,
But I mean, that variance could not ever be granted without the variance for the free board.
Well, that's why I asked the question. They're two very separate issues. And that's why I asked the question if the variance, the freeboard variance was just for the new structure or if it was for the whole building. And I understand that it really is for the whole building because you're doing renovations that are potentially over 50%.
that's the perspective I've taken. I think it's the most legally sustainable. If your counsel wants to advise you otherwise, I'm happy to have that determination and go with the more limited view. Jeff, is there anything you? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
if I could add to that, I'd say under what we've learned from Dawn recently, it would be possible to dry floodproof the pool structure, but it would be very challenging because the place where water might intrude would be from the rooms into it because the rooms front on it. So I guess it's technically possible, but very, very difficult to do.
The pool's on the Dagsworthy side, correct?
The pool's on the
It's on the
Dagsworthy
Dagsworthy
side. The pool could be, I believe, because it's all concrete and swimming pool, it could be maybe even wet flood, not flood proof, but flood vented. I don't know. I haven't looked into that. But yeah, if we allowed the passage of water in and out of there, it would do no additional damage and it wouldn't displace any water or cause any problems to the neighbors or anything. So I just could still be seen as kind of an indoor-outdoor thing with, it's not going to have any wood or any kind of thing that would rot or deteriorate.
So that area is already impervious. Right.
Right.
Correct.
But it's surface level. There's nothing, no
How about it?
three-story building over it, which is what they're asking.
No,
So I'm saying a three-story structure where it's currently a flat area, you are going to have an effect on flood heights because that water is not going to be going into the three-story structure, right? It's going to go somewhere else.
And Jeff,
I don't, if I could, I don't believe the amount of, I think there's two different issues here, and let me understand let me know if I don't understand this correctly. The one type of flooding would be from rising seas, and that's mostly what FEMA is concerned about. The other type of flooding might be caused by stormwater management, which would be extreme rainfall collecting on the roof and coming down and going out into the street. I think, in fact, in terms of stormwater management, the building of the pool enclosure would have a negligible, if any, effect because, as was pointed out, it's already impervious. So the water that's falling there now is already going somewhere out towards the street there. There's actually quite a good buffer between the actual roadway and parking spaces and the pool deck. It's just a odd-shaped street with a really wide right-of-way. In terms of rising floodwaters, I think that's really what the variance request is about, and I think the arguments there have already been made.
any other questions on that topic? So I'd like to move on to the code also at section, so it's on the record, section 101-34 subsection C has a section titled limitations for variances, and it requires that the board consider and makes certain determinations. The first determination, and I'm going to read them just so you have them fresh in your mind. The first determination is a showing of good and sufficient cause. A good and sufficient cause is one that deals solely with the physical characteristics of the property and cannot be based on the character of the planned construction or substantial improvement, the personal characteristics of the owner or inhabitants, or local provisions that regulate standards other than health and public safety standards. So there is good and sufficient cause here in that the variance requested is completely based upon the existing configuration of the property, which is one of the definitions of what rises to good and sufficient cause. The existing configuration of the property and the fact that while the building was constructed well above the current base flood elevation required by FEMA, became legally non-conforming when the town implemented the 12-inch freeboard requirement. So we sort of took this property as it was given to us, improved the way it was improved, and the physical characteristics of the property can lead to a determination of good and sufficient cause. And I'm suggesting here that it is. The next determination that you're required to make under subsection B is a determination that failure to grant the variance would result in exceptional hardship and or exceptional practical difficulty due to the physical characteristics of the property. So here, the physical characteristic of the property is that it exists in an AE flood zone where the town requires an elevation higher than what is required by FEMA. The hardship then is that, or the hardship that has occurred is that we cannot make these normal improvements to the structure as it exists. And it's an exceptional practical difficulty to have to elevate the structure a mere 7.5 inches in order to make these normal improvements. They're very, the dollar amounts sound high, but these are pretty modest improvements to stay current with the look, feel, expectations of visitors. These are relatively modest modifications. The next consideration is the determination that the granting of a variance for development within any designated floodway or special flood hazard area with base flood elevations but no floodway will not result in increased flood heights beyond that which is allowed in these regulations. So the proposal does not include any new impervious areas. So there's no possibility of increased flood heights, and there's nothing on the record suggesting otherwise. You raise a good question about the structure, and now rising flood waters will not be able to into that one small area. I think to Jeff's point is that it's such a small area that the effect will be so incredibly negligible that it will basically have no effect on it. Jeff, do you want to add anything further to that since it's a determination they're required to make?
Yeah, I think in an odd way, if we're not allowed to flood proof this, in fact, water could go in an extreme event, water could go in and out and it would have no effect. In another way, the only addition that we're making that might be of consideration would be, we would like to do this very small expansion of the lobby. It's about 500 square feet addition, but it's on a, nearly 30,000 square foot building. So I'm hoping that's seen as de minimis. It really is a big part of the plan, and we would love to be able to do that. Even if we can't cover the pool, or even if the pool comes with more restrictions, the pool covering comes with more restrictions.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
You kind of skipped over subsection C about the increased cost or inconvenience of meeting the requirements does not constitute an exceptional hardship. I mean, I know based on what we've heard, you've basically said if we don't get this variance, we're probably just not going to do anything with this property. Do you have any idea of what the cost would be if you had to come into compliance with our freeboard requirements?
So
Curiosity.
right, and Jeff, be thinking about this too, but I guess part of the real hardship here is that we physically cannot come into compliance without demolishing the building and rebuilding it, at least as to the accommodate the units, the sleeping units. Because the only way that you can come into compliance with those, I mean, as Jeff has said, and I've said, dry flood proofing is not an option. The only way you can come into compliance is either through a variance granted by the Board of Adjustment or by elevating the structure. So the cost to come into compliance would literally be demolishing the building and rebuilding it.
Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I would add would be, if we had higher ceilings on the first floor, there's some possibility in some structures to raise the first floor the 7 inches. But we only have 8-foot ceilings in there, and the bathrooms already only have 7-foot ceilings. So raising the floor without raising the whole building would be not code compliant. It wouldn't meet minimum headroom requirements. And just roughly, really roughly, the cost of rebuilding the building would be in the, 12 to $15 million range. So it's just, way unlikely to happen.
Thank you.
The next, and the reason I should have mentioned it, but the reason I skipped that one is I saw that sort of as a subset of section B, sort of.
I know, I just
yeah.
wanted to
Thanks,
be a
though.
little clearer.
That was
about
helpful because we got clarity on the record now. The next one is a determination that the granting of a variance will not result in additional threats to public safety, extraordinary public expense, nuisances, fraud, or victimization of the public, or conflict with existing local laws. This one, I can't imagine any way that the granting or the denial of a variance is going to have any effect on this whatsoever, on public safety, because the building has been there forever and it'll continue to be in this exact location, at its exact same elevation. And I don't see a route to getting to increased or, public harm or expense or nuisances or fraud. The next one is the determination that the structure or other development is protected by methods to minimize flood damages. So the issue here is solely one of elevation. The elevation already exceeds FEMA's base elevation, so its current elevation is intended to minimize flood damage. It's above what FEMA has said is a safe elevation. Jeff, I don't mean to put you on the spot because I didn't ask you this previously, but do you know of any other techniques that currently are on the building or techniques that we'll be using in the new renovation that speak to any sorts of minimization to flood damage?
No, just what I said before was that the walls are all masonry, the floors are all concrete. I think that speaks for itself. And the only other, I think it's a little bit of an aside, but we've come into cases like this. It was something you mentioned before about safety, and the fact that all visitors are sort of driving here, and in the event of a flood, the town gets, in the event of a big storm, the town gets cleared. I don't think I don't think there's much. I don't think there's people stuck here in any likelihood stuck here and at risk. I think at some point in a major storm, in a major event, the town is evacuated, and the building is probably one of the stronger buildings built and existing in town that would withstand significant storms.
Thanks for that. So the final one, I'm happy to say, is a determination that the variance granted is the minimum necessary considering the flood hazard to afford relief from the requirements of this chapter. As I said earlier, we're 7.5 inches below the freeboard requirement of the town. That's all we've requested as far as the variance goes. So we are asking for literally the minimum amount that can be requested to bring us into compliance. I do want to move on to the National Flood Insurance Program, unless there are any questions about those several determinations.
Any questions, gentlemen? Any other questions?
Well, I would go back to the C because I'm not sure if I really understood the answer. Part of the what you're saying is good and sufficient cause. It is exceptional hardship is the increased cost or inconvenience of meeting requirements of these regulations.
Mhm.
Correct.
One of the required, or one of the.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
saying
any one of them, presumably.
I'm saying that could make the project cost prohibitive. The exceptional practical difficulty is that we are given a structure that is above FEMA's elevation requirements. We exceed those, but we're told we can't renovate it because we don't satisfy the freeboard requirements. So it's the configuration of the improvements that exist on the property that happened 25 years ago or so that have caused us to be put into an exceptional practical difficulty in a hardship situation. If we were building new today, I wouldn't say, don't make me build to 7 feet because that's an exceptional practical difficulty or hardship. That's not the issue. The issue is we're given the structure as it exists now, and that's created an exceptional practical difficulty.
I think one way to look at it is that practically speaking, there'll be more money spent on the renovations if the variance is granted than will be spent on the property if the variance is denied ultimately, because it's the applicant has indicated that the applicant does not intend to demolish the structure and rebuild. So ultimately, as a cost consideration, they're going to spend more if the variance is granted than they will if the variance is denied.
Is that fair?
That's
Which
correct.
is what
That's
you're
accurate.
not supposed to consider under C, right?
No, which it is what you're supposed to consider. Because it's an
That's a
increased cost.
limitation, right?
Well,
No, but it's basically saying that a reason to grant a variance is because the increased cost or inconvenience, or if it
Well,
doesn't.
then go back to A
constitute-
where it says it cannot be based on the character of the plan construction or substantial improvement.
But so I guess the difference I see here is new construction versus existing construction. And for existing construction, there's a, like they said before, you'd have to demolish the building in order to come to compliance because it's not feasible. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff or Glenn, it's not feasible to just raise the floor
No.
because then you wouldn't be in compliance inside the units because then you wouldn't have the correct height, right? Am I
So
getting that
what
wrong?
Jeff was explaining is
Correct.
that one option that we considered is just raise the floor of the first floor. And would that then satisfy the freeboard requirement? It would satisfy the freeboard requirement. The problem is the ceiling heights in the first floor are so low that by raising the first floor, we'd then become out of compliance with the code as far as what our ceiling height is. So practically, that's not an option either.
So basically, the only way to renovate this property is to grant the variance, or else you'd have to demolish the property, and that's not what you're looking to do.
Right.
Why
One
couldn't you
way-
make the first level parking, for instance? I'm not sure I understand that this is the only option.
I mean, I don't want to get into really redesigning the proposal here, but I mean, I'm sure the viability and the business realities of this property are such that if we lost all the rooms on the first floor, it wouldn't be an ongoing viable business. I imagine. I don't have that as factual, but and there's only 3 floors. If I lose one floor, I'm losing 33% of my entire facility. I would look at it this way. So when you go back and consider that factor C, I would kind of look analogously to what you do when you're normally considering variances under the zoning code, right? What you're doing there is applying the quick check factors. And one of those factors says you've got to balance the harm to the applicant if the variance is not granted against the harm to the surrounding community if the variance is granted, right? Here, I would say the harm to the applicant if it's not granted, all kinds of things. We can't redevelop our property effectively. We can't stay competitive with other businesses. We lose accommodations. The town loses visitors. Ultimately, it loses the visiting public, at least the ones that would stay there. So there's all kinds of harm to the applicant if the variance is not granted. The harm to the surrounding community if the variance is granted, in this instance, is zero because the building already sits there. There's no new harm. We're not asking you to allow us to lower the building, right? We're saying just let us leave it where it is. Let's leave it there. There's no harm to the public right now. It's not going to be any harm in the future if it is. So if you do that balancing act, more harm to the applicant versus more harm to the surrounding community, certainly there's more harm to the applicant if the variance is not granted from this freeboard requirement. So let me move on to the National Flood Insurance Program. And again, we just went through the standards of consideration. I would point out one last thing on those standards of consideration. The one that we've been focused on, subsection C, is only one of the sections of a very lengthy number of sections we read. So I hope you wouldn't vote to deny the variance based upon one single factor to be considered. So the National Flood Insurance Program, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't hear any place in those considerations and determinations any consideration or any weight that should be given to the National Flood Insurance Program and what a variance here might or might not do to that program. Keep in mind that this entire section of the code, this variance section of the code, it exists for you to determine whether a variance should be granted based upon hardships and exceptional practical difficulties as defined by these considerations and determinations. If the idea was that every time a flood insurance rate might be affected, you should deny the variance, then I can tell you that you'll be wholly outside of the legal standard that's been set up in this code. The code does not sort of give that as part of your analysis. I'll explain in a minute though how, if it is part of your analysis, how I would look at it. So first, let me talk about how the program works as well as I understand it. So if you meet the base flood elevation, you certainly have, so imagine that every property in the town of Dewey Beach met the base flood elevation for the whatever flood zone they happen to be in. In our case, we're in an AE. We're supposed to meet the six foot elevation. We meet the 6 foot elevation and then some. This program says, as long as you meet those base standards, I mean, I guess what I can put on the record is that I know of, and I can't imagine any instance where if a town meets the base flood elevations of FEMA, you're not going to be able to participate in the program. You will be able to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program if you meet those base flood elevations. What happens though is FEMA says, if you want to do a little bit better than what we think is a good national standard, if you want to do a little bit better, like Dewey Beach has done in this instance by going to 12 inches of freeboard, we're going to award credits. And the town gets awarded credits. And based upon the number of credits you receive, you can see diminished premiums. So you've received some number of credits, and there will be an audit done. Typically, it's annually of what has changed in the town, and should that affect the credits you get in any way. And that's what leads to whether your flood insurance premiums go up or go down. There is no circumstance, whereas if you granted this variance, that FEMA would say you've come so far out of compliance with our program that you cannot participate in it. Only thing that it'll affect, because you already meet that base flood elevation in this instance, the only thing that it could affect, and I'd be very surprised if it affected at all, is some amount of credits. And if it affects the credits, in this instance, the request is so de minimis, and the fact that we're already above that base flood elevation, I can't imagine that it would have any impact on flood rates. Now, if you as a board got in the habit of people coming in and saying, I'm in an AE flood zone, my building is at 5.5 feet and I'd like a variance, and you're in the habit of granting variances routinely below the base flood elevation, or if people came in with new construction and they said, I know I'm in this area, but I'd like to build a little bit lower, and here's why, you were routinely handing out those sorts of variances, then I would have every expectation that at your annual audit, FEMA would say, no, this isn't the instance for which you're here to provide variances. You're granting relief to new construction that could easily be constructed to the standards. You've got to deny the variance in that instance.
Well, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Sure.
if we're basically audited every year with this structure has existed for how many years?
Right.
So it's been in compliance with FEMA for however long.
Well, right,
correct?
true.
I mean, that's correct, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's been in compliance with FEMA's base flood elevation since, to my knowledge, since it's been constructed. The only thing it's out of compliance with is the additional freeboard requirement that only has to deal with the credits under the program.
So the only really way, I mean, just looking at it from a logical standpoint, it seems like the only way we would get penalized, there's a fly, sorry.
Yeah.
The only way we get penalized by FEMA is if FEMA changed their requirement.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
it's kind of
it
splitting
seems-
hairs, but FEMA will say, look, you've imposed your own 12-inch freeboard requirement. You've taken that upon yourself to do it. And the board can't haphazardly just look away from that. I don't expect you to do that at all. I expect you to look at the totality of the circumstances, the fact that we are an existing building that is above the base flood elevation. It's been there for a long time. We don't have a history of any real impact based upon its current location and as it sits. We don't have any history of it impacting public safety or otherwise. And so all we're asking you to do in this instance is not some crazy exceptional variance where you're granting something below the base flood for new construction. We're asking can we just leave it sit where it sits? Can we just leave it where it is and make some improvements?
Well, I guess what I'm concerned about is there are a lot of the older cottages here that are built at ground level. And if those people come in and say, we want to renovate and we need a variance to do it, how would their case be any different from the one that you're putting forward?
So I'd say that, first, every case is decided on its own merits. I don't know what the numbers are, the dollar amounts that would be required in those small cottage instances to raise it. I do think there's a better ability for somebody who has a small college to actually raise or elevate the entire structure. Here, raising a concrete structure that's 30,000 square feet, you just can't go under and elevate it. Those cottages you can. And those cottages, probably the dollar amounts aren't nearly what we're talking about here. I know dollars aren't something we want to talk about so much, but again, I think there are distinguishing factors in every instance, and one might come in that might be completely make sense to grant a variance for it. So I just think you have to weigh every one of these requests on its own merits.
Well, I think anyone would argue that if we granted it to you, we should grant it to any homeowner who wants to make improvements to an older structure. Under these circumstances.
So what I will tell you, and Mr. Townsend may confirm it if he cares to on the record or not, is that there's plenty of case law that says when a Board of Adjustment sits and makes a determination as to a variance request, it is not legal precedent for the next case that comes in. Now, I will also say that people will come and hold it against you and say, you did it there, why aren't you doing it here? But as a matter of law, it doesn't have precedential value.
Well, I would also say that not every cottage in town is in the same flood zone, right?
Right. That's true too.
So what part of the responsibility of any Board of Adjustment is to enumerate the reasons why a variance should or shouldn't be granted in a particular case, and to make reference to the specifics of that particular case. And you could envision a scenario where maybe in some kind of a residential subdivision where all the properties are very much alike, that it's almost impossible to distinguish one application from another. But it's probably not the case here. But my job is to see to it that you add language to your decision making, whether it's in favor or against, which establishes the unique basis for your position.
So if someone's similarly situated, who meets the FEMA 6 foot, but does not meet the town's 7 foot, and they came before us, similar reason. I'm very concerned that
Similar, like
deny that.
like a hotel that's 30,000 square feet, and the cost of.
No, I mean, I'm talking about any home.
But
Well, but
a
that-
housing cottage is not similarly situated to a 30,000 square foot hotel.
And so as long as I've been on this board, we've had numerous cases of, height and freeboarding, and each one's individual. We've based it on what they're going to add on, size, number of factors, like the one letter we said chicken heads. Well, chicken heads burned down to the ground,
Right.
and he wanted to build new. And we said, you have to build the code.
I was going to make that comment.
I mean, really.
It's a
I mean,
different
so
circumstance.
you can't compare anything that comes into anything else you've done. You have to, I'm just telling you, you have to look at the facts. And tomorrow, if somebody comes in and says, well, I want to have a variance against, you're going to say, well, we'll have to look at your situation, and the cost and why it needs to be done. Most people are going to do it just because of insurance saving and save their property.
Well, and I mean, I think.
And one of the things that what he's saying is the hardship is there's no way they can raise that bill. And I feel like, they're just trying to improve a property that needs improving, and, we should consider all the factors and not worry about what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right. Well, and Rick, and I would say, I mean, I think I've been on now for 5 years now, and we've approved some, we've denied
Yeah.
some, and we all have our reasons why. And as you said, each case is individual, and you have to look at each individual case. And I think, the similarly situated argument, when you're looking at a 3,000 square foot hotel versus a, however many square foot cottage, are completely different issues that. And that, in fact, my neighbors right across the street in New Orleans raised their house. So.
In response to a comment Mr. Dreyer just made, there are a couple of extensions. I guess there's an extension with regard to the lobby that's being applied for, and we haven't really gotten to that yet.
Right.
There's the enclosure over the pool. There is like an awning over one of the units that requires a setback requirement. But can you describe generally, you or Jeff, generally what the improvements will consist of? I don't know that we've gotten much specifics or many specifics on it. And I think Mr. Dryer pointed out that what it is the owner wants to do is a relevant consideration.
Right. So, yeah, just wrapping up on Freeboard, I think this is one of those ones where it perfectly sort of fits the mold of when a variance is appropriate. We went through a lot of examples where variance would not be appropriate, but a building of this size that satisfies FEMA's base flood elevation has been there for a long time. I think this just begs for a variance in this instance. Otherwise, again, it's going to result in the building sitting there, little or no modifications, and ends up being more of an eyesore than a revitalized project that you can be proud of in Dewey Beach. Jeff, I'm happy to go through the improvements, or you can. Should we put, I don't know if we have, Kate, any of the elevations that we had from last meeting that would show an overview?
Yeah, Glenn, I'd
Well,
be
yeah.
happy to just summarize it briefly, and then if anyone wants to ask any more questions, we could talk about it. Kate can pull it up while we're going if she can. But
Thank you, Jeff. And Jeff, just so you know, Ms. Hinks has hard copies, so I'm gonna be able to.
Well, I think
hand
it's,
those
if you
out.
could, Jeff, go through, it's not just the exterior things that you're looking at. I mean, you're looking at renovating, the totals.
it's a fairly significant freshening up and improved and newly branded character. It includes full exterior facelift, addition of a few rooftop elements to give it a little bit more of a contemporary feel, less boxy, replacing all of the exterior railings, adding an elevator. There's a lot of ADA improvements. There's upgraded ADA restrooms and guest rooms. There is the addition of an elevator, which is a significant cost. And then there are the interior. All the bathrooms are completely renovated, all new tubs and showers, all new toilets and fixtures, all new floor finishes, all new wall finishes. All the walls themselves are going to stay pretty much as they are. There's very, very little structural change, but just about every surface inside and out, new signage, new lighting throughout, a plan that's going to gradually replace all the HVAC systems. So it's, pretty much everything you can think of, they want to freshen up. And, if I guess I would just echo, if denied, they just wouldn't be allowed to do some of those things, but the building would still be there with flood insurance. It's like, it would just limit the improvements that could be made, which I think is all to the benefit of the town and everyone from my perspective. I realize you all know a lot more about your town than I do. I know a fair amount, but not anywhere near what you do.
Okay, thanks.
So
Jeff.
you all have plans in front of you now. Are there any specific questions that you have as you flip through the pages and see things, when we point out where the elevator is or point out where the pool enclosure would be? I'm happy to. Oh, here, that's right. The pool enclosure is not on that set.
No.
Let's look at this set here then, that Kate has up, because if you go down one more, Kate, one more.
Yeah,
Jeff, are you
there's
able to
Bob.
see these?
There's the lobby improvements. We're trying to, right now, the lobby is just one little room that's only about 12 feet wide and about 20 feet long, and you can barely fit in there. We're trying to make a nice porch going into there. And then we're trying to make this space, in the lobby that's another 500 or 600 square feet that's out towards the pool. Yeah.
Down one more.
Then Kate, if you'll scroll down, thanks.
Yeah,
You
the
describe-
pool enclosure, so this is where the improvement are, separating the porches from the rooms, making them just nicer finishes and surfaces, giving it more character than just the concrete and stucco. And then with the pool enclosure, trying to make it more of a year-round attraction.
Can you slide down one more, Kate? I think there's another view. This is another view of the pool
Right, that's
enclosure.
looking from the pool enclosure into the lobby expansion. And that's from the upper balcony with that same view looking towards the bay. This is on the parking lot side, this isn't really part of the variance because the addition of the porch on the front of the building as a gracious and much more gracious entry doesn't offend any of the setbacks or the flood issues.
But that center portion there, Jeff, that encloses the elevator, right?
Yes, the tower is the elevator, and that's what you all granted at the initial hearing.
Right.
And it is within, you granted it, but not as an exception. It was not as a variance. I believe it was a special exception as allowed in your code for the safety space, up above the elevator.
Correct.
So this one shows I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so following the last meeting and as Glenn provided updated plans, the owners have agreed to, have requested that we remove the new outdoor pool and leave the pavilion where it exists, which is next to the water sports center, and just leave it as is. So we, anything that might be offensive to the neighbors that showed up that talked about outdoor noise and things, or was in the setback, the pavilion was going to be in the setback on Bayard, are not part of the application anymore.
If I may, of all the things you were describing, the refurbishing and the improving of the interiors and some of the exterior materials and finishes, would any of those require variances? The only thing we're talking about is construction of the 3-story pool cover.
We haven't gotten there yet.
But none of
Correct.
those things
I
would
think we
require an
were just-
exception to the free board.
They do.
I believe we
It's
were
residential.
so that you all understand the extent to which the owners are hoping to invest.
Right.
So if I have this right, and Mr. Mandalis will correct me, and this was a hard issue for me to get my arms around in preparing for the meeting, but the cost of the revitalization project that they wish to make exceeds 50% of the value of the existing structure. And because the existing structure doesn't meet our freeboard requirement, they then are prohibited from spending in excess of 50% of the current value on revitalization.
And how much of that 50% is the 3-story covering of the pool?
I don't know the answer.
I don't know, Jeff, do you have any idea?
They were estimating that at about $1.5 million, but they wouldn't do that alone and not do the rest of it. I think they would probably have to leave that off. I think it's a big enough single item that it probably represents half of the 50% in and of itself. And I think then they'd be too restricted on doing the basic renovations and the ADA improvements and all they need to do.
Hypothetically, I'm not,
The fire marshal is also making a sprinkler protect the building. So that's another big improvement.
but the freeboard issue and the pool structure issue are two separate issues, right? I mean,
The pool
they
structure
don't
requires a
necessarily
setback
go hand
variance.
in hand.
That's right. The pool structure,
So
yeah.
I think that's and that's why I asked the question earlier about the freeboard exception. Was that just to the pool structure or was it to the entire building? So we have to look at them as separate variances. We can grant one, we can grant all, we can deny one, we can deny all. They each stand alone.
Right. I think
So-
Jeff's testimony was that there may be some construction techniques that would allow for either dry flood proofing, or you call it wet something else, Jeff, that would.
I'm not sure that would be allowed. And I haven't looked at that in the code in any detail. I don't know if
Okay.
Don't have an opinion on that yet, but we could look at that if need be.
But the pool enclosure does require a variance from the setbacks. That's right.
Moving on.
Yeah, okay, so that's the freeboard issue. Are there questions that relate to the pool, the pool structure enclosure, the cabana? Is there anything that you'd like to address first that we can tackle in the order you'd like to do it?
Well, why don't you go ahead? Let's go ahead and talk about the pool structure.
So the pool structure, I'm going to refer back to the letter I sent you. I didn't know I'd have a chance to comment on it today. So there is so the pool, that decking structure extends 7 feet into the 10-foot rear yard setback. So let me read this because we had a discussion last time about whether this is a side yard, front yard setback or rear yard setback. And based upon the discussion we had, we did do the analysis, and I do think that it qualifies as a through lot, which changes the setback. So as I characterized it here, I said, because the property qualifies as a through lot, the Dagsworthy Avenue setback is treated as a front yard setback of 18 feet. And my client's variance request for the proposed pool enclosure and multi-level deck structure to extend 15 feet into the 18-foot rear yard that is treated as a front yard setback. So you're right, that is a 15-foot variance into an 18-foot rear yard setback technically. And I went on to say, although we previously requested a rear yard setback variance to permit the proposed pool enclosure and multi-deck structure to extend 7 feet into the 10-foot rear yard setback rather than 15 feet into the 18-foot rear yard. So substantively, the request has not changed. In fact, the existing pool deck already encroaches the setback slightly further than the amount of the encroachment requested here. So the enclosure is going to be slightly back from where the existing concrete around the pool exists now. Technically, you're right. This is treated as a second front yard setback because it's a through lot. But substantively, as I said, the location where it exists is what we requested earlier.
Now, say that again about where the structure with
Sure.
relation to the existing concrete.
Yep.
If you had the structure and like you built that wall
Yep.
as depicted, is that further out than the existing concrete?
No, my recollection, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 12 to 16 inches closer to the hotel and further from Dagsworthy Street.
That's what I was unclear about.
Correct. I think the existing pool deck goes almost right to the property line. It goes just to the inside of the fence. And the fence is built right on the property line. And this would be 3 feet back. So it's probably
3 feet back.
it's probably about 2 feet setback from the existing patio.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is the lobby expansion part of the pool expansion?
So
also?
is your question, do they go hand in hand? If we don't do the pool enclosure, can we still do the lobby expansion?
Or do they go hand in hand? I don't know.
I think, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong here again, the lobby expansion can occur without the pool enclosure. It can.
Well, no, so this whole thing where the setback was greater than we understood when I first met with the various folks in the town there.
I see.
And I think I'm clear on this, but the lobby expansion was seen as part of that whole enclosure. I saw it holistically that we were just asking one variance to go 3 feet to the property line. The lobby expansion is actually designed to go no closer than 10 feet to the property line and is designed no closer to the property line than the other wings of the existing hotel. So it would not be in ways it would not increase the degree. If say the lobby expansion was just built by itself and the pool enclosure was denied, I believe that the lobby expansion would not increase the degree of nonconformity of the existing building because it wouldn't be closer to the property line. Now, I know that different jurisdictions understand that differently.
Mhm.
But I guess another way to look at it is we might be asking if the pool enclosure was denied, we might be asking if that part of it can be kept, or if you could grant an 8-foot variance into the 18-foot for the purposes of the lobby expansion portion of it. Does that make sense?
It does to me. Does that make sense to everybody else? So our initial request, because the pool enclosure was going to go as far into the setback as it was going to go, that's the variance we requested. If the pool enclosure isn't there to do the lobby expansion, the lobby expansion will still extend some amount into that setback. Jeff was referencing that some jurisdictions say, so long as that extension isn't any deeper than extensions into the setback that already exist, a variance isn't required. Other jurisdictions view it differently and say that any new encroachment that isn't existing would require a variance. And I don't know if Ms. Hanks has weighed in on that.
Because of the fact that because of the fact that this structure is non-conforming, it's a legal non-conforming structure to the current setback and requirements when it comes to the current codes. Their addition that they want to add in the lobby is not the one in the front of it that attaches the
Right.
parking lot. They can do that just fine.
Right.
There's nothing to be involved with that. But on the Dagsworthy side, they want a lobby addition that increases the size of that whole lobby area. It would be similar to this particular area right there, although this is not the final rendering, of course. Now, because of the fact that last time when we met, I was not aware of the need to combine the two parcels that originally was there.
Right.
We requested that they combine the two parcels. They did. As a result, the entrance on the one parcel on the Bellevue side, which is the main lobby entrance parking lot area, is what is on the north side. And then on the back side is the Dagsworthy entrance. And so then that made it a through lot. We were not aware. I was not aware of that. I never gave that as a consideration. So per the code, a through lot then has to have, it parallels both two streets. And so as a result, both streets are considered like a front yard setback, and each one gets 18 feet on the north side and 18 feet on the back side, the south side, which makes it very restrictive and so forth. So these folks want to add this addition on the Dagsworthy side to the lobby. That's the purpose of that room. And so then because the now through lot requirement of a setback went from 10 feet to 18 feet, then there is somewhat of a problem or consideration for you all.
So the pool enclosure would solve both, but if we didn't grant the pool enclosure, then they'd have to reapply for a variance in order to expand the lobby. Am I getting that right? Am I getting that right, Jeff?
Is that the way you see it? I mean, that was my question is if the pool enclosure is not granted, one view would say the lobby extends no further into the setback than other locations of the building, and therefore a variance is not needed for it. Another view would say that it's a new encroachment. That area isn't currently encroached and you would need a variance. The thing I wanted to put a finer point on that Don just spoke about is the fact that when our clients bought the property, it was two separate parcels. So you couldn't characterize either of those parcels. So the hotel straddled two properties, but you couldn't characterize either of those parcels as a through lot because they only had frontage on one street. The town asked us to combine the lots because it cleans things up and it just seems the way things should be. If you exist across the property line, you should combine the lots. We did that But what that then did to us is it made us a through lot, changing our setback on Dagsworthy from a 10-foot setback to an 18-foot setback. We'd have no problem with the lobby expansion under the 10-foot setback. It's the 18-foot setback that now
Creates
harms
the
us.
problem.
Right.
And
Again,
if I might,
Sure,
if I
Jeff.
may, it appears that the original setback when the property was developed was 10 feet. Because not only does the lobby expansion portion of this not go any farther than the existing hotel, but it actually on both sides of it, to the east and the west, goes that close. So it's kind of encompassed. It's not going to be standing out from any point of view. I know you guys have looked at, the question that came up last time was if neighbors look down the line, what are the front of the existing buildings? But this would be kind of tucked in between the two existing wings, in a way that would go no further out than those two wings already are there.
And so this drawing, which is not a drawing, would this lobby expansion then open into the 3-story pool enclosure
Yes.
on the
Yes.
east side? Or would it surround it?
It would open to the east side, and then we had a porch walkway so that someone could walk to the pool around the lobby without walking through the lobby with the wet bathing suits and all.
Fred, what are your thoughts about the necessity for a variance? I'm just trying to throw out
Mhm.
all options out here. And Dawn, your thoughts too, if we didn't grant the variance for the pool and structure, would a variance be required for that lobby expansion? Or because the building already juts out that far, it wouldn't need a variance?
Okay, well,
But can I weigh in just for a moment before
Okay,
you, because one thing that I've thought about is that, I mean, really, we're talking about a notice requirement. Did we put the public on proper notice to be able to come and say, I'm okay with this or I'm not okay with this? So we've already requested a variance that goes, much further out than the lobby would go. So I think there's been enough notice to suggest to the public that something's going to be closer to that setback. And therefore, I think if you wanted to, if we'd like to have the pool enclosure, if you deny that for some reason, I think you could say, however, we will grant a variance of whatever Jeff says we need to.
And then that's why I'm just trying to clarify because
and that is exactly the way I would look at it, is that what was applied for represented a larger encroachment into the setback than what this particular aspect of the development, irrespective of how you decide or what you decide with regard to the pool enclosure, then I think from a notice requirement perspective, I think you'd have the authority to grant this if you chose to.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here.
Good.
Did you have a question?
Other questions?
Can I continue on?
Yeah,
Got that
sorry.
part. So you get the hotel expansion. Now the deck over the hotel, the lobby expansion will be solid, obviously. And then, okay, so I'm going to the flooding part. I would like to know how you're going to drain the roof for the pool enclosure and for the deck next to it. Where are you going to drain all that? That's going to be an awful amount of water coming down. And now it just falls into the pool and then the shrubs and everything. So you're going to have a permanent structure, pretty large.
Jeff, are we at those engineering type level of designs yet?
They've looked at it briefly. They've determined that actually the impervious area is about the same. And, we're planning on channeling it so it doesn't drain off onto the neighboring property, which is the town property. I know, but it's not any additional flow over what's already coming off the pool deck and off the walkways. The area where the lobby expansion is proposed is currently a concrete deck that is completely impervious. It's where they have a lot of seating and everything, seating there.
Well, I understand that.
So there's, I'd say, but there will be gutter, to answer your question. Oh, pardon me, go ahead.
I'm talking about the roof is not going to be into the pervious surface. It has to be drained somewhere, and it's a large area to drain.
Correct.
just-
It's all, it will all be handled with gutters and downspouts, but the eventual where the water goes is no different than what it is now, and the amount is no different than what is there now.
No, I disagree with that completely. Because now it just soaks right into the pool or the surface.
But it doesn't, it's a concrete
When it
surface.
rains now, it's gonna hit a hard surface roof and it's gotta go somewhere. You gotta drain it somewhere.
I believe, I mean, as far as I understand, there's not water absorbed by the concrete deck or by the swimming pool itself. The water goes off the edges of it. And in fact, with this improvement in engineering, there will be some proper swales built and some proper drains built to help contain it better than it is now. I think it'll be actually an improvement in how it's.
That's what I was asking. That's.
Yeah,
what I was
no,
asking.
It will have to be engineered, it will have to meet stormwater requirements, whereas now it's the same amount of impervious area, but it just flows off into the surrounding impervious areas.
Okay.
Swimming pools are considered impervious
Right, but
surfaces.
if it's covered. It's not, no rain gets to it. So where's that rain go? Then it's got to go onto the roof and then channeled somewhere like into the street or
So,
something like that.
I think we're saying the same thing, but if a pool and the decking around it are considered impervious, that means it doesn't absorb any water. The water runs off it. So if you put an impervious surface over top of an impervious surface, then you're not contributing additionally to the stormwater drainage problems. That's the argument.
Because
I see what you're saying, Rick. You're saying a pool, because when it's open,
Yeah.
if it rains, the rain that comes down directly over the pool goes into the pool. I mean,
But
until.
now if you have a roof and then
Right.
you're enclosed over the lobby, there's a lot of surface for that water to have to go somewhere. It's just-
It will be dealt with according to code and according to regulations, and I think the disposition of the water will be improved.
Anything else?
Does the pool structure require reinforcement underneath? I mean, you're gonna build a structure. Is it gonna have to have footings or?
Yeah, there'll be, it's
Wall.
a frame structure proposed to be steel, about every 12 feet on center. So there's going to be, footing pads. It's been just conceptually done with, we have had structural engineering consulting on that. I think each of the footings would be 3 by 4 feet or something like that. There's about 10 of them. They would be under the slab, under the existing slab, so they wouldn't contribute anything additional to the impervious area from what's already there.
And what would the exterior be, glass?
It's a combination of glass and probably hardy plank or some other siding. We've looked at kind of all glass pool enclosures, and it's very difficult to meet the energy codes these days. So they're proposing more of a solid roof with a few skylights and then a wall that's about half glass and about half insulated.
Anything else?
I'm done.
Anything else? Anything else before we move on?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so we're done with the pool enclosure. The last item is the cabana that hopefully is a little bit easier to discuss than some of the other things we've gotten through tonight. So this cabana is sort of on the eastern side of the property going toward Bellevue and Bayard. If you look at any of the renderings, you'll see that on the portion of the building that faces the bay, those first level rooms, the units there, each of them are proposed to have kind of a covering that extends from the porch that's kind of currently there. We can do basically all of them except for this last one on the eastern side because it extends 6 feet into the 18-foot front yard setback. So we would need a variance for that one. From a visual perspective, it just would look weird to have a number of these cabanas and the last one be lopped off because it's in the setback. We didn't hear any real concern from the Cajun Cove residents as to that. They did have they did take issue with the relocation of the pavilion, which we've agreed not to relocate. But this last cabana that would only be usable by that one unit on the end doesn't seem to be burdensome to the neighbors in any way. I should mention, Jeff, just so the record is clear, that I suppose the cabana on the other end, now that it's an 18-foot setback, it also has an encroachment.
Beat me to it, Glenn. I was going to mention
Okay.
that. It's about the same amount. It looks like it's about 6 feet. We haven't measured that one as carefully.
Okay, same analysis though of the lobby expansion. To the extent that you don't grant the pool enclosure, you can grant a lesser variance that would accommodate that last cabana. So it's the cabanas on both ends of the first floor.
What's going to be made out of? What's the surface?
The surface is a wood deck, and the cabanas are just simply, we call it cabanas, but it's really kind of like a pergola. They're independent. They're made out of wooden posts wrapped with vinyl and kind of a pergola roof on top, like a trellis. Kind of open air. They would not at all impede floodwaters, and they would be secured down to secure small concrete footings. They don't take much of a footing because there's no real load on them.
And would you consider that something that might be swept into other lands or injured of others?
No, I mean, I think they'll be very securely fastened, and they don't provide much resistance to floodwaters because it's just the post, and and water can sweep past the post without detaching the thing. I mean, it will be engineered to be resistant to any kind of movement away from the building.
That was the rough sketch that was provided to me a number of
Yeah,
weeks ago.
weeks ago. Yeah.
So, and that request would be considered under the quick check factors, which are the typical factors that you apply because it's an encroachment into a setback as opposed to a elevation, relief from an elevation requirement.
Other questions? I mean, I can say, look, I work with a lot of owners. This is a good group of owners. We were concerned when Cajun Cove made public comment. We hadn't anticipated it, and they immediately said, let's sit down and talk this through. I mean, doing away with the pool on the bay side was a big decision, but they said, these are neighbors who are going to live there and they enjoy that area. And if we're going to impact wildlife that's there or noise, that's not the way we operate. So, what I can express to you is that they've really tried to be as transparent as possible and provide a design that's, really fits the Dewey Beach schema and where we're trying to go. I wish, I wasn't sure that we were going to be able to comment tonight, so we don't have any of the owners here. Jeff will tell you, if they were here, they're way more charismatic than me. So take that into account maybe. But we do appreciate the opportunity to present the application. If any other questions come up, we're happy to answer them, but we do respectfully request that you grant the variances.
Jeff, any final, if I can talk, any final comments from you, Jeff?
No, I would agree with Glenn. I've worked with the Burbage family in Blue Water for about 35 years now. We've done a lot of high quality projects. They built the Ocean Suites Hotel in Bethany, if people are familiar with that. They've done a number of campgrounds. They're renovating the Fenwick Inn now down in Ocean City and doing a super job there. They've renovated the Commander Hotel in Ocean City, and they just are, it's a quality act and very, very professional. So, they have every interest in bringing that level of quality to Dewey and doing you all proud.
Thank you. Kate, do we have anyone in the waiting room for public comments? Guys, do you have any questions before?
Mr. Dryer, there's a good view of the cabana on this.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the prints. I was more concerned about if it floods, what's going to keep the decking from coming up, post from moving,
Mhm.
that type of thing. And that's one of the conditions under the considerations for danger of materials being swept into other lands.
Well,
So I just,
so
you know,
just
I just like to know how.
it's not well, it is a consideration under quick check to the extent that if what was requested could significantly impact a neighboring property, then you would take that into consideration. But it is not per se to be subject to the factors that were listed in the flood.
Okay. Thank you.
So you're saying that that doesn't pertain to the chapter 101 flood damage?
Does not. Mm-mm.
Only the freeboard issue pertains to the chapter 101. Correct?
Yeah, the relief from the setback requirements are analyzed under the quick check standards, which are those 4 criteria. What is the zone? What's the character of the immediate vicinity? Thirdly, whether removal of the restriction on the applicant's property would significantly affect the neighboring properties. And lastly, whether the applicant can establish an exceptional practical difficulty. And the exceptional practical difficulty is what we've been talking about, hardship.
But I think what you were saying and we went through those, the B1 says the danger of materials may be swept onto other lands, the injury of others.
So what I was saying is that comment is relevant in the context of whether what is proposed could significantly impact the neighboring property. But the language that's being cited is a set of factors that apply to relief from FEMA requirements and not relief from setback requirements.
Right. Right. But for the flood damage reduction, that is a factor.
For the elevation,
Right.
that is.
And we would have to make specific findings regarding the danger the materials might be swept on lands of other injury. And I think that's what Bob is getting at, right?
But they're different. That's the
They're
thing.
different.
They're
Yeah,
different.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I still don't.
Okay. So these rules that we went through only applies to the freeboard requirement, whether or not, but the setback requirement, which is what the cabana falls under, does not have the same level of standards. It has the quick check for standards.
So this is what I asked before, and this improvement of the cabana then does not require the granting of the variance for the freeboard.
Correct. There are 3 separate issues. We've got the cabana setback, we've
So
got
the cost
pool.
of this would not be part of the 50% either.
Yes, it would. The cost of everything. Cost of replacing toilets, cost of replacing carpet, shingles. As I understand it, everything relates back to this is difficult to. It's not typical. It's not a typical variance or set of variances that you're presented with. That's the significance of the freeboard exception. Is that it relates to everything.
May I contribute? Or are you in deliberation and I can't?
I haven't closed public comment yet. You're free to.
Okay,
Go
just
forward.
to clarify that one a little bit, I believe from my conversations with Dawn and all that, of the, I think it's 12 rooms that face the bay, we could build 10 of them no matter what. And these, it would only make a difference of whether these 2 on the ends could be built. I have been through this in a number of jurisdictions, and open decks are not subject to flood requirements. They are subject to anchorage requirements under the structural code, and they will meet that. They will have to meet that. And yes,
That's why I asked what it was made of.
yes, and these are the kind of things that, these are the kind of really nice amenities that are the kind of things that might have to be cut if we have to keep the cost down. So it's just an example of the level of quality and the kind of touches, the nice touches they're trying to do.
So at the last meeting, you thought you needed a variance from the setback in order to place the cabana in on the last unit, but now we're talking about a through street, so there are probably 2 cabanas that are impacted, not 1. Is that right? 1 on each corner? Okay, I'm sorry if I missed that.
And we're okay with working that in this meeting here, or
Yes.
do they have to, they don't have to?
No,
go?
we're okay because what they're asking for is further,
Oh,
so we can just grant the
gotcha.
variance for that specifically if. Right, I got that right. Okay, and you, Kate, you said there's nobody in the waiting room to comment? Okay, so on that note, unless anyone has any other questions for Jeff or Glenn, I'm gonna go ahead and close the public hearing at this point. And we can start, the board can start discussion. But let's just go in order here for the agenda, since the first item on the agenda is with regard to the multi-level deck structure. And as we've heard now, it's a little bit different than initially the application was because the property owners have combined the properties. So the setback is now 18 feet versus as a front yard setback versus the 10-foot setback. Any thoughts?
And we shouldn't probably punish them because they decided to do a third.
Right.
They
So,
seemed like they were helping out the town on that one.
right. Well,
So,
but it's still a very, even
Yes.
under the old rules, it was still a variance. So
right,
Rick,
but-
any thoughts on your thoughts on this structure as it's proposed and allowing that setback?
We're talking about the pool.
The pool setback,
Yeah,
yes.
my views on it. I'd say it's a tough one, but I think overall, it would be a good improvement for the property. Some of the reasons for that is, one, it is on a street where there's really no neighbors looking at it. It's not affecting the quality of the neighborhood at all. It will keep the noise down, although, you know, on that street, it's pretty noisy anyway. And I think in looking at the structure as it is now, when you drive by, I think it'd be a nice improvement for the structure. The freeboard is, I think they can't do that. So I would approve the variance for that.
And what about
And
the-
for what again? What's the motion?
I was just gonna, let's
thought we
do one
just
at
had
we're just gonna do one at
conversation.
Yeah,
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 right.
we're just conversation right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're not voting yet. I just wanted to get everyone's thoughts before we, you know, make, yeah, the public.
You need a majority of the quorum.
No, okay. No, that's okay. Okay, so, and then what about the cabana? What are your thoughts about the setback for that?
You know, I don't think it's a big deal. You know, I think they're gonna build it across. I mean, the only thing we can make them do, or they could do for, you know, to make it look right, is take off 8 feet on one side, 8 feet on the other, and just have going down the middle, but I don't think that's necessary as far as the way they describe the where they're gonna build it. Sounds like it's gonna be structurally sound. Shouldn't be any problem with, you know, flooding or anything like that. So, yeah, I think it's not gonna affect anybody. Nobody's gonna see it from anywhere except for the bay.
Right.
So, you know, pretty good on that one.
I don't have a problem with the cabanas, but I do have a problem with both the freeboard and the 3-story enclosure for the pool. I don't have a problem actually with the lobby expansion, but that's where I am.
Any particular reasons why?
Well, I just think this flood damage reduction 101.34, I mean, it clearly says what the limitations are. And a lot of what's being taken into account here are things that it says you shall not consider. So I think you're basically gutting section C if you go along and say that these have been met.
I disagree with the freeboard particularly, because I think, you know, this is an existing structure that's been there for however many years. And since it's within FEMA requirements, you know, the town made additional, you know, an additional standard, but I think because it meets FEMA standard, if it didn't meet FEMA standards, I think it's a whole nother story. But since it meets FEMA requirements, I'm I'm okay with that.
But I asked Fred earlier about whether this chapter 101 was a FEMA requirement or a town requirement, and he said it was a FEMA requirement.
It is, but I'm saying, but the difference is FEMA is 6 feet, the town is 7 feet. They are at 6.4 feet, so they're in compliance with FEMA. And my position is that I'm in agreement with the variance because they are in compliance with FEMA, and because I think it does meet the conditions of having a, it would be a hardship for them to try.
So-
I got so many pieces of paper in front of me, I'm trying to read the language.
So if
I'm
if
gonna
I
make a
could,
motion.
if I could comment in
Oh,
response.
sure.
So FEMA imposed upon this jurisdiction and the rest of us in the area, other municipalities, this obligation to adopt this chapter 101 with a minimum of modifications. So one of the modifications the town was allowed was to decide whether it wanted to include a freeboard requirement or not. But even so, FEMA's requirement allowed for boards of adjustment to be authorized to grant relief, not just from the freeboard, but from base flood elevation. Now, they didn't want to make it easy, so they set forth all these considerations that must require findings on the part of a board to grant one. It's not meant to be handed out willy-nilly for the reasons that Mr. Mandela stated, that ultimately you might have to pay the piper in terms of increased premiums.
Yes.
But the idea that that this town or this board should never consider granting variances, even from base flood elevation, is inconsistent with the charge that we were given, which is to authorize boards of adjustment to hear appeals like this and hear
You're just reading
requests.
shall out of this provision. It says you shall.
It says you shall what?
Well, it says you shall, it deals with the physical characteristics of the property and cannot be based on the character of the construction or substantial improvement, personal characteristics of the owner and inhabitants, which we've heard a lot about. And then it says increased cost or inconvenience. But none of those shall be only issued when those have been not considered.
These are considerations.
It says it shall only be issued a bond, an A, B, and C. So we're considering B and C and some part today that it says you're not supposed to consider.
So we're splitting hairs a little bit, but I think it's evident that the applicant wishes to spend more money, not less, on the property, and that it's an existing property. So if you grant the variance, the applicant can spend more on revitalization than they can otherwise. That's a practical effect of the situation the applicant is in.
Right.
So they're going to spend more instead of less. The applicant has a desire to make what I think you could agree is a normal set of improvements to the property. They've described them as modest, except they're costly. But they're not changing the footprint of the building in the flood zone, with the exception of the lobby, which is modest, and to, I guess, a greater extent, the enclosure over the pool. So those are items that you'll have to consider when the time comes.
Now, what do you consider C, limitations of variance? Do you read that and you still get the same
Understood.
conclusion? Yeah. C.
Yeah. No, I think it's pretty clear that it says shall only be issued upon showing good cause, but then it tells you how you determine good citrus and cause. And many of the things we've been talking about tonight are things that there explicitly says you're not supposed to consider.
Yeah, but that's only one of the, I mean, there are A through G here of things that
Right,
you're
and I'm
supposed
talking
to
about
be.
A, B, and C.
So you're looking at, but I think there's a B and C it's definitely a hardship to them for this variance not to be considered, because they would have to essentially either not do the renovations that they want to do to improve this property, or they'd have to tear it down and rebuild to the standards, which is completely cost prohibitive.
So yeah. If I could add, if this applicant had a raw piece of land and came in and said they didn't want to comply with the standard because it's more expensive for them to build to that standard than it is to build to a lesser standard, then you would have,
A different story, which is exactly what we did with Chickenets.
which is a clear case of, I mean, that's an argument that's much harder to justify than to say, we just want our building legalized. You make our building legal, our existing building, you make it legal through the granting of this variance, and that opens the door to the expenditure of additional funds to revitalize the structure.
Any other thoughts on, while we're talking about Freeport, might as well continue on that. Rick, any other thoughts?
You're asking me?
No, I asked Rick.
I know,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
okay. Well,
Um,
since we're on this topic, I'm just gonna go ahead and make a motion to approve the variance, the freeboard variance, the 7.5 inches based on the discussion we've had, as well as my belief that it's not granting the variance would be an exceptional hardship or practical difficulty based on the fact that it's an existing building. Raising the building is impractical, as we've heard tonight, where they can't even just try to raise the floor, because then it would bring them out of compliance with the height restrictions within the rooms. As well as,
Go through C if you would.
the increased costs or inconvenience of meeting those requirements creates the exceptional hardship or difficulty. Is that what you're?
Yeah, so unlike a typical variance from a setback requirement, this chapter requires that you affirmatively address
B
the
as well.
limitations that are set forth
Okay.
in C1, A, B, C, and D. So we need something
For all
on
of
the
them.
record regarding.
Do I
all.
need to address the B issues as well?
Those are
Those are the,
factors for your consideration. If you were to deny, if you were moving to deny, you could choose
Okay.
any one of them, but this is indicating that
Okay.
an affirmative decision requires a discussion of these considerations. C1.
okay, so let me start over. I make a motion to approve the variance with regard to the freeboard, 7.5 inches, based on a good and sufficient cause, based on the characteristics of the property, and the fact that failure to grant this variance would result in exceptional hardship due to the physical characteristics of the property, and that basically cost prohibitiveness of any of a tear down and rebuild if this was not granted. This shouldn't, the building's been in existence for 25 plus years, and so it does not increase the existing flood issues within the area, since it is an existing building. There are no additional threats to public safety based again on the fact that it is an existing building. There are already methods in place to protect flood damage based on the fact that it's already within FEMA limits, and it's minimally necessary based on the fact, again, once again, goes back to the fact that it's an existing building and it's already within FEMA requirements. There's my motion.
Would you also say that the applicant's effort to address the factors listed in B1 through 11 was satisfactory?
Yes, I would add that as well. And specifically, I would say that, again, to me, it goes back to the fact that this is not a new, or it's not new construction. This is an existing structure. And it's compatible with the current use and the use within the town. Do I have a second?
I second. And you're good.
Thank you. I was trying, stumbling over my words. It's getting late. I'm tired.
Yeah, that's
It's been
all
a
right.
long day. So all in favor?
So
Oh, sorry.
all votes should be votes in favor of. and-
Oh, that's
and
right, I
Votes
forgot.
as opposed. So when you vote, you'll vote last and we'll
Okay.
probably say your vote is based on the considerations you made during the motion. So
Okay.
we'll next need to hear from one of the other members.
Okay, so Rick.
So I vote in favor because of what she said.
Any other?
No,
Conditions?
no. I think you nailed everything I was thinking about, so.
Dave?
I oppose the variance to the free board and to.
We're just on the free board.
Yeah, just on
Just
the
on the
free.
free board.
That was a motion on the. free
That was
board.
a motion on the free.
And the reason I oppose is for the reasons I've stated, that I believe that the factors that it says do not go into sufficient cause, that insufficient cause have been considered. And there's been no showing that you couldn't make most of these improvements without changing the free. And one of the last of the requirements of the limitations is that there's a determination that the variance is granted as minimum necessary, considering the flood hazard with relief from the requirements of this chapter.
I vote in favor of the variance based on the reasons I've stated. And I just had another thought and it just went right out of my head. Like I said, it's getting late, so.
Mhm.
For the reasons I stated previously.
Okay, so the motion carries.
Motion carries 2-1. Okay, moving on. So, let's go to the pool structure. I know, I already got everyone's thoughts. Rick, do you?
Well, do you want, can I suggest we
Yes,
do
yes, please.
the
Cabanas
cabanas?
first,
Yeah, the
because that's-
setback.
The setback. Okay, so let's go to the setback, which is number 3 on the agenda, which is the variance for the front yard setbacks, both now, as we understand it, because of the way the property has been
Designated.
designated. Thank you. That was the word I was looking for. I'm seriously having issues. So there'd be the cabana would require the first unit on the Bellevue side and the first unit on the Dagsworthy side to be approved for that setback in order to allow those cabanas to be built in front of those two specific groups. Thoughts or emotion? Anyone?
And one quick thing, I'm sorry to go backwards on the free board.
Mhm.
As I interpret the motion, the free board variance would not permit any additional structures or beyond the footprint of the current building, other than those that could be approved
Correct.
later.
Right.
So you've legalized the building as it currently
As it
is,
currently
not
is.
open the doors to constructing other improvements below the free board.
And why is that? I don't understand.
Because the free
Because-
board is based on the existing structure.
Right, but you're saying that you're waiving the free board requirement, so why can't they?
With
make any
with
improvements?
respect to the existing
Except-
improvements.
Right.
And with respect to the existing
So
improvements
only
and
for
what's
these
applied for
particular.
and what's applied for.
What's-
So it's not like saying
It's not
you-
carte blanche.
you can build something new without complying with the free board requirement, other than those items that are being requested tonight by application.
So any additional comments about the cabanas or a motion regarding the cabanas?
I motion that we approve the variance for the cabanas. Based on one fact that when they put a, throughway, they lost one side, which they had. So I think in order for it to look good and conform with the hotel, they should, be allowed to do the cabana. I'm not real good at the words, but
So,
gotcha.
so that consolidation of the lots has created an exceptional practical difficulty
yeah.
for the owner.
So-
Yes, definitely. And it's not going to affect any of the neighbors adversely.
So no significant impact to the neighbors and the presence of an exceptional practical difficulty.
And I would, oh, I guess I shouldn't add to.
Yeah,
On the consolidation of the lots,
Mhm.
I haven't seen a plot plan. It may have been in some of the materials, but those lots were east and west and not north south.
South.
Well, wouldn't they both have been through lots then? Why
Um,
would, I don't understand the difference about the consolidation.
the bay is here and over here is the ocean. Their parcels ran this way,
Well, that's east and west.
east to west.
Yeah.
Yes. So
That's what
there
I
was a north parcel and a south
So
parcel.
the-
Bellevue and Dagsworthy. So the line that ran in between the two here, why this hotel was halfway on this lot and halfway on this lot, have no
But the
clue.
lot on Dagsworthy, that would have always been the front set.
Yes, and that.
Yeah, this is
always
with
did-
respect to the one
Right.
cabana. Mhm.
Yes,
But now, given the fact that we know that the consolidation has created an issue if we don't approve the setback on both sides, I think Rick's motion is to include the setback for both
Both
sides for
sides,
the
yes.
cabanas to be built in front of the rooms on the first floor. I will second that motion. So let's, again, I'll start this time since I vote to approve, obviously, the cabanas based on the reasons stated, as well as the fact that it won't alter the essential character of the neighborhood or the district and the property is located. And it's a minimum variance that will afford relief based on what they want to do, based for the aesthetics of the property. I think it's in the best interest of the improvements. Rick, or sorry, Dave, do you go yea or nay?
I have no objection.
No objection. And for any reason, any other reasons?
So is that an affirmative vote or?
Yes. that's
Okay,
affirmative.
all right.
Any other reasons other than what's been stated?
No.
Affirmative vote, no reasons other than what's been stated.
Thank you. Okay, finally, last but not least. So the pool enclosure. So any further discussion with regard to the pool enclosure? I know Dave, you seem to have strong opinions about the pool enclosure, so talk to me. Let's get your comments about the pool enclosure.
Well, my concern for the pool enclosure is that you're allowing a 15 feet encroachment into an 18-foot setback on a front. And other people that have surface improvements come in and say, well, we'd like to build a structure over our surface improvement. How are we going to distinguish between this case and that? And
Okay. So,
I've heard the arguments
Mhm.
about that, but that is my concern. So would vote against it.
okay. So, and I don't mean to sound like I'm advocating because I really don't mean to be, but you are rightly concerned about creating a precedent. And I would urge you, if you're voting in favor of this, or if you're voting against this, either way, to acknowledge the fact that we already have an encroachment into that setback area of how many feet? Do you remember?
it was, let's see,
Well, the pool deck goes right up to the, basically to the property line.
7 feet into the 10-foot rear setback. That's the way it was originally. Went in 7. It needed to be 10, but it went in 7. And now that imaginary property line, due to it being a through lot, now extends 18 feet.
Right, but does some portion of the main structure extend into that?
Already.
setback Already?
Not that I know of.
No, not into the 18 feet.
Not,
Okay.
unless it's the cabana, the end room, like this end room there. That's already, let's see, where did that go?
Okay.
Okay, yeah, no, that's, thank you for the clarification. Okay, so any other thoughts?
No, that's my basis.
Okay. Rick, any of your thoughts?
Now in setback.
It's a structure that's being built, but it's being built on an existing platform already. So
Three-story building.
really doesn't make much sense to deny them the variance because it's already in the setback. They're not going any farther into the setback. I don't see, I think it's not any adverse effect on the neighborhood. I don't believe that it will be an issue for any other Board of Adjustments that might come up to us because everything's specifically different. So,
Okay, I agree with your point earlier, when we were discussing about the fact that, it would be a shame to punish the property owners for doing something by combining the properties that we asked them to do, the town asked them to do for the future. So
and it's not like they're ripping up the whole side of the building or anything. They're just adding structure to improve,
and keep in mind that any final plans still have to be approved by
right,
the town.
approved by.
So it's not that, we're giving them the opportunity for the setback, but not, it still has to comply with the other, right, Dawn?
I'm sorry.
Their plans would still have to comply with the town before, would still require approval from the town. The plans would have to be approved
Yes, have to. approve.
regardless. So,
And also it has to go through
and
the
the county,
county,
that's well.
because they're going to look at it from the building code perspective. Does the building meet the requirements of the International Code Council?
So it is the case that the existing building at its south, what corner is that?
Would be
Would be the
the
South.
south, yeah.
East.
southeast.
Yes,
southeast corner.
that portion, a significant portion of that structure is in the setback as well as at the other end of the building.
Where the cabanas will be.
Down here, this is also in the setback.
Right.
Significantly.
So based on that, I will make a motion with regard to the pool structure that the setback be approved in order to build the structure.
Yeah.
Based on the physical circumstances that currently exist with regard to the existing building. And its reasonable use of the property in order to make the improvements. There is, it will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or district other than improving the aesthetics of the neighborhood. And it's a minimum variance based on the fact that the concrete around the pool already extends into the setback. And therefore, it is not encroaching any further with regard to the neighborhood as it exists. Is that okay? Rick, I'll start with you. With, how do you vote on that motion? Or do you second the motion? I'm
I
sorry.
second the motion.
And go ahead and I'll let you vote first as well.
I vote on the motion. I vote on the variance for the pool enclosure. Vote,
Affirmative.
yeah, A.
Yes. Any additional reasons other than what I've
No,
mentioned? Okay. David,
I would vote against that.
any reason, any particular reasons?
For reasons that I've stated, it's fine to say that there's already pool there, but some people can have a patio in their backyard that's in the setback, and they could say, well, we want to enclose our patio. I just don't know how you can draw this difference.
I vote yes to approve the variance based on what I've stated, as well as the fact that I do think this property is distinguishable from other surrounding properties, and we'll deal with other properties as they come up, what they want to do. And I think that's it. So that's a 2-to-1 vote in favor of the pool enclosure variance.
Does that address the lobby?
That, because that's
Extension.
included, because the lobby is
Okay.
inside the variance that's being approved. And I think, I'm really glad I don't have court tomorrow, so I can maybe sleep in a little bit. So, based on that, I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn the meeting unless anybody has any just final comments. I'll go ahead and move to adjourn the meeting.
I second.
All in favor?
Uh,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for your consideration. Appreciate it.